The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Grand Hotel was a sight to behold. Chandeliers hung like clusters of glittering stars, casting a golden glow over the elegantly decorated space. Ornate floral arrangements adorned each table, their soft fragrance mingling with the scent of gourmet cuisine being prepared in the kitchens. The room was filled with some of the most influential figures in politics, business, and media, all gathered for an annual charity gala dedicated to supporting underprivileged youth. The event was both prestigious and exclusive, a night where high-profile guests mingled under the banner of philanthropy. The soft murmur of conversation wove through the room as waitstaff in crisp uniforms glided between tables, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne. A string quartet played in the background, adding a layer of sophistication to the evening. Conversations ranged from business deals to political strategies, with intermittent laughter punctuating the air. However, despite the lavish setting, there was an underlying anticipation among the attendees, an eagerness to hear the night's keynote speaker, a well-known journalist famous for their sharp wit and unfiltered commentary. Among the crowd, seated near the back, was Barron Trump. At just 18, his tall frame and composed demeanor made him stand out, though he did not seek the attention of the room. Invited by a family friend, Barron's presence was not an attempt to be in the spotlight, but rather an opportunity to observe a different social circle. Unlike many others in attendance who thrived in such high-profile gatherings, he preferred to remain in the background, quietly watching the event unfold. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room, taking in the atmosphere with a calm detachment that belied his age. The evening progressed smoothly, the scheduled programming unfolding with practiced precision. Guests raised their glasses in support of the cause, and speakers took turns expressing their appreciation for the generous donations made toward the charity. The journalist's speech was the most highly anticipated event of the night, expected to be equal parts insightful and provocative. As the master of ceremonies took the stage to introduce the speaker, the crowd gradually quieted, shifting their attention toward the podium. Barron, too, leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. No one could have predicted that what was meant to be a night of refined discourse and celebration would soon take an unexpected turn, one that would place Barron Trump at the center of the evening's most talked-about moment. As the master of ceremonies stepped up to the podium, the room gradually fell into a respectful silence. The evening had already been filled with elegant conversations and generous pledges, but everyone knew the main event was about to begin. The keynote speaker, a renowned journalist known for their sharp tongue and biting political commentary, had been promoted as the highlight of the night. While some attendees admired their fearless approach to journalism, others found them controversial, especially those who had been at the receiving end of their critiques. Regardless of where one stood, there was no denying that this speech would be the most talked-about moment of the evening. The journalist walked onto the stage with practiced ease, exuding confidence. Dressed impeccably in a sleek black suit, they carried an air of authority and charisma that immediately drew attention. The audience responded with polite applause, though there was an undeniable sense of anticipation in the air. Would they keep things light and celebratory, or would they use this prestigious platform to make a statement? The room waited, eyes fixed on the stage, eager to hear what they had to say. They started their speech smoothly, opening with a few well-placed jokes about the city's notorious traffic and a humorous anecdote about a past gala mishap involving a toppled champagne tower. Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing some of the initial tension. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the evening would follow the usual polished and predictable formula: an inspiring message, a few amusing remarks, and a call to action for the charity at hand. However, as the speech progressed, their tone shifted subtly. What had begun as lighthearted humor took on an edgier note, veering into social and political critique. They touched on current affairs, poked fun at notable political figures, and offered sharp commentary on the state of the nation. Each quip drew a mix of reactions. Some laughed heartily, others exchanged wary glances. Then, they turned their attention toward Donald Trump. "Well, we can't talk about the state of the world without mentioning the man who made orange the new black," they quipped, earning a round of chuckles from certain sections of the audience. "Love him or hate him, you have to admit, he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me." The crowd's response was mixed. Some attendees laughed openly while others shifted uncomfortably. Barron Trump, seated quietly at his table, remained still, his expression unreadable. If the journalists noticed him, they didn't acknowledge it. At least, not yet. What began as casual political jabs quickly escalated. The journalists scrutinized Trump's policies, his social media habits, and even his most publicized missteps. The laughter that had initially filled the ballroom started to thin out, replaced by murmurs and uncomfortable shuffling in seats. The jokes had become sharper, more personal. Some guests glanced toward Barron, wondering how he was processing it all. Then came the moment that would shift the entire energy of the evening. And of course, the journalist continued, pausing deliberately for effect, we can't forget his most overlooked legacy, the next generation. I mean, let's talk about Barron. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Heads turned instinctively toward Barron, who remained motionless. The sudden mention of his name had placed him in an uninvited spotlight. Some guests exchanged uneasy looks, realizing that the tone of the speech had taken a turn that no longer felt appropriate. The journalists pressed on, their voice laced with playful mockery. Imagine growing up in a golden tower, surrounded by marble everything, and your dad tweeting about Kofefi while the rest of us are just trying to survive Monday mornings. That must have been some serious character building. A few nervous chuckles punctuated the heavy silence, but most in the room sat in stunned disbelief. Unlike the earlier jabs at public figures, this remark felt different. It wasn't aimed at a politician or a powerful leader. It was directed at an 18-year-old young man, someone who had spent most of his life deliberately staying out of the political spotlight. For the first time that evening, the journalist's confidence seemed to waver. The energy in the room had shifted dramatically. The joke had not landed as expected. Instead of laughter, there was tension, an unspoken acknowledgement that a line had been crossed. Barron, however, remained composed. He didn't flinch, didn't glance around the room for support, didn't show a flicker of reaction. He simply sat, still and unreadable, as the weight of the moment pressed upon him. The journalist, perhaps realizing the discomfort they had created, attempted to brush past the moment, forcing a laugh. "Tough crowd," they muttered into the microphone. But it was too late. The atmosphere had changed. The usual rules of public discourse and humor had been challenged, and all eyes were now on Barron. What he did next would leave the entire room speechless. Room held its breath. A heavy silence had settled over the elegant ballroom, as if the weight of the journalist's words had physically pressed down on the crowd. It was one thing to joke about politics, but this felt different. This was personal. All eyes were on Barron Trump. Seated at his table near the back of the room, Barron remained motionless. He didn't shift in his chair, didn't glance around uncomfortably, didn't fidget or react in any of the ways one might expect an 18-year-old to when put on the spot in a room full of powerful people. His expression was unreadable, his features carefully composed. Yet the stillness itself spoke volumes. The journalist, standing confidently at the podium just moments ago, now seemed noticeably uneasy. Perhaps they had expected laughter, maybe even an eye roll from Barron. Instead, they were met with a quiet, unshakable presence. One that did not cower, did not retaliate, but simply existed in defiant stillness. The silence stretched. Some attendees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others glanced toward Barron with quiet sympathy, some even with admiration. It became clear that he wasn't going to react on their terms. The journalists, too, must have realized this as they cleared their throat, attempting to brush the moment aside with an awkward chuckle. "Tough crowd," they muttered, hoping to regain control of the room. No one laughed. Instead, something remarkable happened. Barron moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the edge of his chair and pushed back, the soft scrape of the chair legs against the polished floor the only sound in the stunned quiet. He stood, tall, poised, commanding attention without demanding it. His sheer presence alone seemed to shift the dynamic of the room. The journalist, still gripping the podium, watched as Barron took a step forward, then another. Each step measured, unhurried. He wasn't rushing, wasn't flustered. He walked toward the stage, his posture straight, his hands at his sides, exuding a quiet confidence beyond his years. By the time he reached the front of the room, the entire ballroom was transfixed. No one dared to speak. Even those who had initially chuckled at the journalist's jokes now seemed to understand that something significant was unfolding. Barron stopped just short of the stage. He didn't need to climb onto it, didn't need the podium. He stood where he was, gazing at the journalist with calm, unwavering eyes. Then, finally, he spoke. "Thank you for your insight," he said, his voice steady, composed, but firm. The words, so simple yet so deliberate, struck like a hammer against the silence. For a moment, the journalist didn't seem to know how to respond. They had been the one wielding control just moments ago, turning the crowd's attention wherever they pleased. Now, they were being met with something they hadn't anticipated, a response that wasn't filled with anger, defensiveness, or hurt, but unshaken resolve. Barron continued, his voice carrying a weight far beyond his age. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life," he said. "It's almost become a game to some, a way to fill in the gaps when they don't know the full story. And I get it. We're public figures. It comes with the territory." The room remained utterly silent, hanging on his every word. Even the journalist, now standing still at the podium, seemed captivated by the moment. "But there's something important that often gets overlooked," Barron continued. "Behind every headline, behind every punchline, there's a human being. Someone with their own struggles, their own dreams, their own story." A ripple of quiet murmurs spread through the audience. This wasn't just a response. It was a lesson, one spoken not with arrogance, but with a rare and striking clarity. "You may think you know me because of who my father is," Barron said, his tone remaining even, almost thoughtful. "But you don't. Not really." The journalists shifted uncomfortably at the words. Perhaps for the first time that evening they truly understood what had just happened. The joke, meant to be a fleeting moment of humor, had landed in a way they had not expected. It had become a mirror, reflecting not only on them, but on everyone who had laughed, everyone who had made assumptions. "What I've learned," Barron said, his voice unwavering, "is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's full story." A quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Heads nodded, even those who had chuckled earlier now seemed deep in thought. He then turned slightly, not just addressing the journalist anymore, but the entire room. "We live in a time where it's easy to tear each other down," he said. "Words have power. They can hurt, or they can heal. They can divide, or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." The weight of the statement hung in the air. This was not the response of a wounded child, nor of someone eager to fight back with sharp words of his own. It was something much greater, a call for dignity, a challenge to everyone in that room to reconsider the weight of their words and the depth of their assumptions. Barron took a small step back, his gaze settling on the journalist one last time. "I hope this gives you something to think about," he said softly, with neither resentment nor sarcasm, just quiet, undeniable strength. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his seat. The entire ballroom sat in stunned, deafening silence. Even the journalist, still frozen at the podium, seemed unable to muster a response. Then, slowly at first, the applause began. A hesitant clap, then another, until the entire room erupted in a standing ovation. Some clapped out of admiration, others out of a quiet sense of redemption for the discomfort they had just witnessed. But all understood one thing. Barron Trump had just owned the moment. The tension in the ballroom was so thick it felt like the very air had turned heavy. The journalist's joke about Barron Trump had been meant as a fleeting moment of humor, but instead it had created a palpable discomfort among the guests. Some had laughed reflexively, others had exchanged nervous glances, while a few sat in stiff silence, clearly aware that the line had been crossed. At the center of it all was Barron himself, seated near the back of the room, his face now the focus of every eye in the ballroom. And yet, he did not react as many expected. There was no flinch, no flicker of embarrassment or anger. He did not slump in his chair or shift uncomfortably under the weight of the crowd's gaze. Instead, he remained perfectly composed, a stark contrast to the unease rippling through the elegantly dressed attendees. His expression was calm, so calm that it became unnerving. The journalists still standing at the podium seemed to recognize the shift in the room. Their once confident smirk wavered ever so slightly as they glanced toward Barron's table, perhaps realizing that the moment had not landed as intended. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The normally buzzing atmosphere of the gala had vanished, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Even the clinking of glasses and hushed whispers that usually filled moments of silence had ceased. The journalist cleared their throat, attempting to break the awkward tension. "Tough crowd, huh?" they muttered into the microphone, forcing a chuckle. Still, no one laughed. Then, Barron moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the edge of his chair and pushed it back. The sound of the chair's legs scraping against the polished ballroom floor cut through the silence, making the moment feel all the more dramatic. At just over 6 feet tall, Barron was already an imposing presence, but as he stood, there was something even more commanding about him. Not because of his size, but because of the measured confidence in his movements. The journalists stiffened slightly, gripping the podium as they watched him approach. This was not what they had anticipated. The room held its breath. Barron's steps were unhurried, each one carrying the kind of purposeful grace that could not be faked. He wasn't stomping toward the stage in indignation, nor was he hesitating. Instead, he walked with the steady assurance of someone who knew exactly what he was going to say. By the time he reached the front of the ballroom, the crowd was utterly transfixed. And then, in a voice that was calm but firm, measured but deliberate, Barron spoke. "Thank you for your insight." The words, so unexpected in their restraint, sent a ripple of quiet astonishment through the room. The journalist blinked, clearly caught off guard. The audience, too, seemed momentarily stunned, perhaps expecting a sharp retort or an emotional rebuttal. But Barron didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. Instead, he commanded the moment with a quiet dignity that few could have anticipated. He turned slightly, addressing not just the journalist, but the entire room. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life," he continued, his tone even, almost thoughtful. "It's almost become a game to some, a way to fill in the gaps when they don't know the full story." A few murmurs ran through the crowd. Even those who had initially chuckled at the journalist's joke now shifted uncomfortably, their amusement replaced by a growing realization. Barron continued, never breaking eye contact. "And I get it," he said. "We're public figures. It comes with the territory." Then his tone shifted, carrying a quiet intensity. "But there's something important that often gets overlooked." The journalist tensed slightly, as if sensing the weight of what was coming next. "Behind every headline, behind every punchline, there's a human being," Barron said. "Someone with their own struggles, their own dreams, their own story." A few guests nodded instinctively. Others exchanged guilty glances. "You may think you know me because of who my father is," Barron continued, his voice steady. "But you don't. Not really." The journalists swallowed hard, their earlier confidence now replaced with something else entirely. The unmistakable realization that they had underestimated him. Barron let the words settle for a moment before he delivered the final blow, not with malice, but with a wisdom far beyond his years. "What I've learned," he said, "is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's full story." The room was silent, yet heavy with understanding. Some guests looked down, seemingly reflecting on their own words and actions. Even the journalist, once so assured of their control over the evening, seemed to finally grasp the gravity of their mistake. Barron turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over the entire ballroom. "We live in a time where it's easy to tear each other down," he said. "Words have power. They can hurt or they can heal. They can divide or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." It was not a plea, not a demand, but a challenge. a challenge to choose better, to think before speaking, to recognize the humanity in others before reducing them to punchlines. And in that moment it became clear Barron Trump had not just responded to the journalist's remark, he had transformed the entire evening into something much bigger than anyone had anticipated. Then, with the same quiet grace that had carried him to the front of the room, Barron took a single step back. His gaze flickered to the journalist one last time, not with anger, but with a sense of quiet finality. "I hope this gives you something to think about," he said softly, and with that he turned and walked back to his seat. The room exploded into applause. It started with a hesitant clap from somewhere near the front, then another, until the entire ballroom erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. Some clapped in admiration, others in a quiet sense of redemption for the discomfort that had filled the room just moments earlier. But no one could deny the sheer weight of what had just transpired. Barron Trump, in less than a few minutes, had taken a moment of public humiliation and turned it into a profound lesson on respect, dignity, and the power of words. And in doing so, he had not only silenced the room, he had changed it. As Barron Trump turned and walked back to his seat, the ballroom remained silent for a fraction of a second, as if the weight of his words still hung in the air. Then, like a slow-burning spark igniting into a flame, the first clap rang out. It came from an older gentleman near the front, a respected business mogul known for his measured demeanor. A heartbeat later, another clap joined in, then another. Within moments, the entire room had erupted into a standing ovation. The applause wasn't just polite or obligatory, it was genuine, thunderous, and filled with emotion. Some attendees clapped in admiration, others in a quiet sense of redemption, as if making amends for their own silence earlier in the evening. A few guests, particularly those who had chuckled at the journalist's remarks, now found themselves reconsidering their reaction, their hands hesitating before joining in. For many, it wasn't just Barron's words that left an impact. It was the way he had carried himself. He had been calm, yet commanding, composed, yet powerful, choosing wisdom and dignity over anger. Instead of responding with outrage or sarcasm, he had delivered a measured and insightful message, one that challenged the entire room to reflect on the power of words and the weight of assumptions. Even the journalist, who had started the entire ordeal with their attempt at humor, now stood motionless at the podium, their earlier confidence completely dissolved. They forced a tight-lipped smile, but it was clear they had been shaken by what had just transpired. For the first time that evening, they were not in control of the room. Throughout the audience, reactions varied. A young woman, a journalist herself, dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. She had attended the gala expecting an evening of high-profile speeches and elegant networking, not a lesson on respect and empathy from an 18-year-old who had just outclassed an entire room of seasoned professionals. A middle-aged man, a well-known actor, leaned toward his companion and whispered, "That kid has more grace than half the people in this industry." Near the back of the room, a business executive, who had earlier been engaged in casual conversation, now stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that he had just witnessed something far more significant than a moment of awkwardness at a gala. Some guests simply sat in stunned silence, replaying the moment in their minds. It wasn't just the immediate response that struck them, it was the realization that Barron's words would linger far beyond that evening. As the applause finally began to settle, murmurs rippled through the room. Conversations resumed, but they were no longer lighthearted or superficial. Instead, they carried an air of reflection. Had they ever made unfair assumptions about someone? Had they ever spoken too quickly without considering the impact of their words? Had they ever been guilty of laughing at the expense of someone else? For many, Barron's response had turned what was supposed to be an ordinary charity gala into an unforgettable moment of introspection. And as the evening continued, one thing was certain: no one in that room would ever look at him the same way again. As the gala continued, the energy in the room had completely shifted. What was once an evening of casual networking and lighthearted banter had transformed into a moment of deep reflection. Conversations buzzed across the ballroom, but they weren't about business deals or political gossip anymore. Instead, Guests discussed Barron Trump's unexpected response, dissecting his words and the impact they had left on everyone in attendance. Though Barron had returned to his seat and resumed his quiet composure, the night was far from over. Guests discreetly pulled out their phones, some whispering to their table mates while scrolling through Twitter and Instagram. Within minutes, videos of Barron's speech began appearing online. Attendees who had recorded snippets of the moment were already sharing them, and soon the clips spread beyond the confines of the ballroom. By the time the gala ended, social media was already ablaze. Hashtags like Barron Trump speech and class and composure and respect matters began trending on Twitter. People who had never paid much attention to Barron before were suddenly captivated by his poise and wisdom beyond his years. One viral tweet read, "I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. What Barron Trump just did at that gala was pure class. That is how you handle disrespect." A well-known journalist who had attended the event tweeted, "Watched Barron Trump shut down an entire room with just a few words. Not with anger, not with outrage, but with wisdom. A lesson for us all." Meanwhile, on TikTok and Instagram Reels, short clips of Barron's speech amassed millions of views within hours. Users stitched videos together, highlighting the contrast between the journalist's smug mockery and Barron's dignified response. The next morning, mainstream media outlets picked up the story. Some headlines praised Barron's composure, while others debated whether the journalist had crossed a line by targeting him. Major talk shows and podcasts discussed the moment, some admiring Barron's ability to rise above the mockery, while others questioned the ethics of making him the subject of public scrutiny in the first place. Prominent figures across industries also chimed in. A former First Lady posted, "Grace under pressure, a lesson in dignity from Barron Trump last night." Even celebrities who had never publicly aligned with the Trump family acknowledged the impact of the moment. One famous actor wrote, "Say what you want about his family, but that kid handled himself better than most adults would have." Feeling the mounting pressure, the journalist who had made the remarks released a public statement the following day. "Comedy and commentary should challenge perspectives, but they should also be wielded responsibly. I crossed a line last night, and for that I apologize to Barron Trump." However, the damage had already been done. Many online users were not satisfied with the apology, calling it insincere and reactionary. Others pointed out that the moment had sparked an important discussion about respect, dignity, and the way public figures, especially young ones, are treated in the media. Despite the social media storm, Barron remained silent on the matter. Those close to him noted that he wasn't interested in the frenzy surrounding the event. He had said his piece that night, and to him that was enough. Yet, whether he intended it or not, his response had left a lasting mark, not just on the gala attendees, but on millions around the world. In an age of outrage and instant reaction, he had chosen grace. And people noticed. In the days following the gala, the conversation around Barron Trump's response continued to grow beyond social media, spilling into news segments, talk shows, and op-ed pieces in major publications. What had started as a moment of tension in a ballroom had now become a larger discussion about respect, dignity, and the power of words, not just in politics, but in society as a whole. News anchors and commentators across the political spectrum debated the incident. Some praised Barron for his restraint and wisdom, while others used the moment to reflect on the broader issue of how young public figures should be treated in the media. One popular morning show host remarked, "It doesn't matter if you support his family or not. What Barron Trump demonstrated was maturity beyond his years. He didn't respond with anger. He didn't lash out. He simply reminded us all that words carry weight." Meanwhile, some media analysts questioned whether the journalist's remarks were appropriate in the first place, igniting a debate about the ethics of ridiculing the children of political figures. Many pointed out that while public figures often expect scrutiny, young adults like Barron shouldn't be subjected to the same level of criticism, especially when they had done nothing to invite it. Beyond political circles, the incident sparked a renewed discussion about the importance of civility in public discourse. In an era where personal attacks and viral put-downs have become commonplace, Barron's response stood in stark contrast. He had the opportunity to retaliate, yet he chose grace over conflict, respect over resentment. A well-known author shared in a widely circulated column, "We live in a world where people rush to tear each other down for sport. But what happened at that gala was a reminder that the real power lies in choosing how we respond. Respect is not a weakness, it's a strength." Parents and educators began using the event as a teaching moment, sharing clips of Barron's speech with students to discuss the power of words, the importance of respect, and how to handle criticism with dignity. Some teachers even included the event in discussions on cyberbullying and online discourse, encouraging students to think critically about how they engage with others, both in person and on social media. In the end, Barron Trump's actions had sparked more than just a viral moment. They had started a conversation that reached far beyond that gala, one about empathy, dignity, and the choices we make in the face of adversity. The impact of Barron Trump's response at the gala extended far beyond the walls of the Fairmont Grand Hotel. His poised reaction and thoughtful words left a mark on those who witnessed it firsthand. But more importantly, it ignited a broader conversation about civility, dignity, and the way society treats public figures, especially young ones. Barron's actions stood in contrast to the increasingly divisive and reactionary culture of public discourse. In a time when social media thrives on outrage and instant rebuttals, his ability to remain composed and respond with grace was refreshing. People from across the political spectrum took note. One political commentator noted on a primetime news segment, "It's rare to see someone, especially at his age, respond with such thoughtfulness in the face of public ridicule. It should make us all pause and consider how we engage with one another, especially in an era where personal attacks have become a form of entertainment." Beyond the political sphere, leaders in business, education, and even entertainment referenced Barron's response as an example of integrity under pressure. Corporate figures drew lessons from it in leadership seminars, emphasizing the power of composure and measured responses in high-stakes situations. As the video of Barron's response continued to circulate online, parents and educators saw an opportunity to teach an important lesson about character, resilience, and emotional intelligence. Teachers introduced discussions in classrooms about handling criticism, responding with dignity, and the consequences of our words. A high school teacher in Texas shared, "I had my students watch the video of Barron's response, and we had a long discussion about what it means to control the narrative when faced with conflict. Many of them admitted they would have reacted with anger or sarcasm, but after watching him, they started rethinking how they handled difficult situations." For many young people, Barron's ability to de-escalate the situation without compromising his self-respect was a revelation. In a digital age where public figures and even everyday individuals face scrutiny, his actions became a blueprint for responding to adversity. Perhaps one of the most significant effects of the incident was the way it forced journalists, entertainers, and commentators to reconsider the boundaries of satire and critique, particularly when it comes to public figures who have not sought the spotlight themselves. Following the event, some media personalities expressed regret over how quickly public discourse has normalized personal attacks on political families, particularly young adults who are often targeted simply because of their last names. A widely circulated op-ed in a major newspaper posed the question, "Have we gone too far in our culture of criticism?" Barron Trump's response was a reminder that beneath every headline and punchline there is a real person. Maybe it's time we rethink how we engage with one another, both in media and in everyday life. While the gala itself faded from the headlines, the impact of Barron's response endured. His decision to remain calm and offer a measured, insightful reply became an enduring example of strength through composure. It was a moment that transcended politics, reminding people of a simple but often forgotten truth: dignity is a choice, and how we respond to adversity defines who we are. The moment Barron Trump stood his ground at the charity gala was more than just an isolated event. It became a catalyst for reflection on the way society engages in discourse, particularly with public figures and their families. His measured response to public mockery was not just about handling personal criticism. It was a statement about the power of respect, restraint, and dignity in a world that often rewards outrage. In an age where social media amplifies snap judgments and heated reactions, Barron's calm and composed demeanor stood in stark contrast to the culture of immediate retaliation. His response served as a reminder that strength is not always loud, and true confidence doesn't require tearing others down. Many who watched the moment unfold at the gala or later on video found themselves reassessing their own approach to disagreements and confrontations. Conversations in online forums, workplaces, and even among families revolved around a critical question: how do we respond when faced with disrespect? Do we react emotionally, or do we take control of the narrative through measured words and actions? The gala incident also reignited discussions about the ethical boundaries of public criticism, especially toward young individuals who have not actively chosen the political spotlight. While public figures often expect scrutiny, Barron's case highlighted the need to distinguish between political critique and personal attacks. A prominent columnist wrote, "Barron Trump's response wasn't just about defending himself. It was a reflection of the broader issue of how we treat one another in public discourse. Are we engaging with ideas, or are we attacking individuals?" His actions challenge us to reflect on whether we are fostering an environment of meaningful discussion or one of constant division. In the days following the event, the message was clear: words hold power. Barron's response proved that even in uncomfortable situations, grace and self-respect can turn a moment of ridicule into an opportunity for reflection. His actions encouraged many to reconsider their own interactions, whether online, in politics, or in everyday conversations. Do we seek to build up or tear down? Do we listen with understanding, or do we mock without thought? In the end, Barron Trump's words served as an invitation not just to those in that ballroom, but to everyone, to choose dignity, to engage with respect, and to elevate the conversations that shape our society. In a world that often feels divided, where conversations turn into arguments and respect seems like a fleeting virtue, there is something deeply profound about responding to criticism with grace rather than anger. Barron Trump's poised response to public mockery at the charity gala serves as a powerful reminder that our reactions shape not just how others see us, but also how we see ourselves. For many older Americans, this lesson is not new. Life teaches us that there is great strength in restraint, and that dignity often speaks louder than words. Throughout the years, we have witnessed moments where tempers flared, words were exchanged in haste, and relationships suffered as a result. But we have also seen the wisdom in choosing patience, in walking away from unnecessary conflict, and in meeting disrespect with quiet strength. We live in an era of instant reactions, where people are quick to take offense and just as quick to retaliate. Social media fuels the fire, turning disagreements into public battles and making it easier than ever to criticize without consequence. But what do we truly gain from engaging in negativity? Barron's response was a lesson in self-respect and composure. Instead of allowing himself to be drawn into confrontation, he chose to elevate the moment, to remind everyone in that room, and later the world, that one can stand firm without stooping low. In doing so, he shifted the conversation away from mockery and into something meaningful: the importance of treating others with kindness, regardless of the situation. As we reflect on this, we must ask ourselves, how do we respond when faced with criticism? Whether it is a family disagreement, a misunderstanding with a friend, or even a heated political discussion, do we add fuel to the fire, or do we choose the path of wisdom? The power of silence and reflection. One of the greatest gifts of age is perspective. We learn that not every battle is worth fighting, and not every insult deserves a response. Silence, when used wisely, is not a sign of weakness, but rather a demonstration of wisdom. Think of the times when someone has spoken harshly to you. Did reacting in anger ever truly resolve the issue? More often than not, harsh words create deeper wounds. But a measured response, or even a refusal to engage in negativity, often diffuses the situation. Respect is a two-way street. But it starts with us. We cannot always control how others treat us, but we can control how we respond. By choosing dignity, we set the tone for the interaction. Just like Barron Trump at the gala, we can choose to hold our heads high, to remain composed, and to remind those around us that character is not defined by how we are treated, but by how we treat others. So how can we apply this in our daily interactions? Pause before reacting. The next time someone says something that upsets you, take a deep breath. Give yourself a moment before responding. This simple act of pausing can prevent unnecessary conflict. Lead with empathy. Sometimes, people lash out because they are hurting. Instead of immediately getting defensive, ask yourself, what might this person be going through? A response filled with understanding rather than anger can change the course of a conversation. Choose your battles. Not every argument needs a response. Some comments are best left unaddressed. Walk away with dignity, rather than engaging in a battle that will only drain your energy. Set an example for younger generations. Our children and grandchildren learn from watching us. When they see us handle difficult moments with grace, they understand that strength is not about overpowering others, but about having control over oneself. Use words to build, not tear down. The words we choose have the power to heal or to harm. Whether speaking to a family member, a neighbor, or a stranger, let us choose kindness whenever possible. The legacy of kindness and strength. At the end of the day, our legacy is not built on how we responded in moments of praise, but on how we handled moments of challenge. The greatest leaders, parents, and mentors are those who understood that true strength is quiet, not loud. Barron Trump's response at the gala is a reflection of a timeless truth. Dignity, respect, and kindness will always be more powerful than anger and resentment. As we continue to navigate life's challenges, let us remember that how we react is a choice, and that choice defines who we are. So the next time someone challenges you, criticizes you, or tries to bring you down, ask yourself, will I meet them at their level, or will I rise above? The answer to that question may not only shape that moment, but could serve as an example for those who look up to you. After all, dignity is one of the greatest gifts we can leave behind. Let's use it wisely.